Hello, how are you today? Do you want to dive into a book that might just surprise you? Whether it becomes your next favorite or one you might skip? Let's find out what readers are saying about it.
Spenkovich, who has 381 likes, says, "More like Sunrise on the Weeping, am I right? A prequel of Pain and Punishment in Panem. Sunrise on the Reaping brings the blood, brutality, and betrayal of the Capitol's games back for another thrilling and utterly chilling edition of Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games series. Haymitch has always been my favorite, and so I had high hopes for this installment. Dear Suzanne Collins, you delivered and more. Collins' series' signature critiques of propaganda, oppression and rule by fear and force come screaming through this novel, where winning isn't surviving. It's just a different way to die. Set about 40 years after the events of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, yet with 24 years still to come before Katniss first steps into the arena in the Hunger Games. Sunrise unveils the tale of Haymitch Abernathy as he is plunged into a fight for his life in the 50th Hunger Games. The return of familiar characters from a new vantage point. Haymitch is 16 and not a drinker at the outset of this novel allows even stories we thought we knew a chance to reveal that Katniss and the reader's knowledge of the past was largely filtered through government propaganda, and the truth is much more horrifying. There is certainly a lot more reaping than sowing here. And though this novel seems rather hit or miss with fans, I found this to be a page-turner of dark excitement and dystopian social criticism that draws us into an unsettling feeling of complicity in the violent voyeurism of the games that, for all the brutal bleakness, manages to center the fragile humanity and will to endure in a way that keep the story from collapsing under the weight of burdens already well trod in the series. A fast-paced and fun return to the gruesomeness of Collins' dystopian vision. This is an excellent new chapter where moments will make you feel as if your heart breaks into fragments so small it can never be repaired. And Collins shows she still has the power to move audiences in new and surprising ways. Because you will never think of squirrels the same again. Sorry, I am entirely the Capitol's plaything. They will use me for their entertainment and then kill me. And the truth will have no say in it. You know that quote from G.K. Chesterton, how fairy tales do not tell children the dragons exist, but rather they tell children the dragons can be killed? Replace fairy tale with dystopian fiction and dragons with government, and you get to what Collins is doing here. A key to good dystopian fiction is showing a behemoth of terrible might and power, but then showing how there is a weak point where the average person can topple it all. If they have luck and good friends on their side, I suppose. While the original series felt like a warning against being moths to the flame of marketing media that upholds social inequalities prostrates us before the powerful, Sunrise arrives at a time where we're already drowning in the muck and the mire. Yet Collins doesn't wallow. In fact, she seems to be slapping us with pages saying, "Stop this. Pay attention." Which includes all the thirst traps of prequel Snow. Stop it. Sure, he's so hot, but he's an evil genocidal maniac, so nah. And while the novel peers into the gloomiest, most gruesome corners of Panem to highlight the horrors within, there is a spark of revolutionary spirit just itching to catch light. Collins has always had an excellent philosophical undercurrent to her tales, and Sunrise upholds this intellectual weight. She even opens with a quote from David Hume that aptly sets the stage. Nothing appears more surprising to those who consider human affairs with a philosophical eye than the easiness with which the many are governed by the few, and the implicit submission with which men resign their own sentiments and passions to those of their rulers. Collins gives a sharp look at the power of propaganda to reduce the masses to cattle in the eyes of the state, to give them entertainment, to keep them occupied, and to keep the oppressed down with marketing that claims they deserve their poverty. It is in keeping with what Roman poet Juvenal wrote around 100 AD, that everything now restrains. itself and anxiously hopes for just two things: bread and circuses. And now we have kids killing each other in hopes they can put food on the table but are really just lambs for the slaughter. In an interview, Collins discussed how the version of Haymitch we meet in the start of the original novel was misleading, and this book offers a better view of him and why he is the key to her novel. She mentions is Hume's concept of implicit submission, which he defines as why people resign their own sentiments and passions to those of their rulers, and how we can see a reflection of our current society in the world of Panem. As to the question why the many submit to the few in Panem, Collins says Hume already answers this. We're allowing ourselves to be controlled by opinion. And that's where propaganda comes in. Alright, then. What propaganda do we all consume on a daily basis that maintains this status quo? Is it harder to maintain in an autocracy or a democracy where we pride ourselves on our intellectual or political freedom? How much propaganda does it take to make you think that implicit submission is what you want? Is it inevitable? Is there a way to protect ourselves from it? Collins also adds that the novel is also about the uncertainty of inductive reasoning. Propaganda. Love. Because of the ways propaganda and misinformation worm through the narrative, Haymitch was the most logical choice to be the narrator, and so begins our dark journey to the past and back to another of the bloody arenas for the games. He who controls the media controls the minds of the public. Noam Chomsky. The way Collins sets this up with astute parallels to the original trilogy is fantastic, and while it is likely the darkest and saddest of the novels, it might well be the most rebellious. To know where things will end up by the era of Katniss only enhances the tension and terror here, as we realize little Haymitch's reward for not dying in childhood is an adulthood of depression and alcoholism leading to activism. Can relate, buddy. But while filling in these gaps in time, Collins also emphasizes the gaps between the rich and the poor. The glitz and glamour of the capital overflowing with wealth, where women can get literal cat ears modified onto their head, with the harshness of the districts like 12 where Haymitch is bootlegging so his family can live off the meager pay. The impoverished contestants are less people and objects of disposable entertainment for those in the capital who objectify, sexualize, gamble on, and bat nary an eye when they die. Things are not peachy in Panem poverty, and all roads seem a rocky burden with no goal in sight, and that's part of our trouble. Thinking things are inevitable, not believing change is possible. The story begins as the 50th Hunger Games is adding a new twist: double contestants for twice the terrible entertainment. This is the fateful games that ensnared Haymitch to toil as mentor for the rest of his life, and with double the contestants, Collins manages to pack in double the violence and trauma. We have a father made to mentor his own son, knowing damn well he's not gonna make it, and Haymitch isn't even reaped, but a sudden death gets him tossed in anyways. Oh, also the reaping is Haymitch's birthday. Happy birthday, kid. Nobody feels like having cake after watching two kids being hauled off to the capital for slaughter. Dead kids and deadly squirrels sure make for a fucked up read, and while the novel often nudges towards torture porn, this one is brutal. Friends, that is actually a large part of the point. The capital's annual funfest is just straight up torture porn, marketed as a patriotic display of power. Snow, disease-ridden and fully leaning into his evil impulses, is an obdurate tyrant at this point, dispensing cruelties for the sake of cruelty and hoarding enough power that nobody will dare lift a finger to stop him, regardless of how monstrous his actions are. And his henchmen will always ensure snow lands on top or it's their heads. The erosion of checks and balances, the inability for the people to keep their leaders in check, leads to terror. Like, oh hey, here's a copy of The Dead Girl. You're welcome. Shudders, you don't win the Hunger Games by playing fair. You win by knowing the rules better than they do. We always knew the games were bleak and fucked up. But few does Collins really pull back the covers to reveal just how intensely fucked up we are talking about. Like real bad. No spoilers, but if you thought everything was chance, well, ask Plutarch about that, because apparently he's been here the whole time, and Collins leads into some rebellion stuff that makes you realize it was far more orchestrated behind the scenes of playing dumb that occurs in the original novel. Haymitch in particular, where being a drunk idiot nobody expects anything from is a great maskiff. You need to weasel your way in to light the fuse of revolution. It's really great to see more fleshed out versions of side characters. Though some great characters might just be absent in 50 years. We've only had one Victor. And that was a long time ago. A girl who no one seems to know anything about. But hey, at least the love interest in this one is also musically inclined. But few love doesn't seem to get much of a good break in this world. They will not use my tears for their entertainment. It's another year of the Hunger Games, and as usual people are like, hey, so this shit sucks and maybe we should stop it? But really nobody ever does, because trying has pretty unfathomably terrible consequences. And not just for you but your loved ones too. Don't let them paint their posters with your blood. Not if you can help it. Is good advice. But also a reminder that dying brutally with dignity is the only victory really. That the dying brutally part is just, it's going to happen to you. Brace yourself. This book gets rough but is also surprising, because what you thought you knew about Haymitch's life was all under the wraps of government propaganda. The games must end here, now. Every death reinforces the importance of the arena plot succeeding. Propaganda takes center stage in the social criticisms on the novel, and Collins pulls in a lot of poetry quotes from the likes of William Blake and Edgar Allan Poe, among others, enhance the atmosphere but also remind us how much a pretty pairing of words can affect people. Of course, George Orwell is always on mind with a quote at the ready for any good dystopian fiction. 2. All propaganda is lies. Even when one is telling the truth. I don't think this matters so long as one knows what one is doing. And why. And don't forget William Blake's "A truth that's told with bad intent beats all the lies you can invent." We see how propaganda dupes a populace. How it coaxes submission. How it rubs out the feelings of empathy and humanity if we can cast the poor fighters as glamorous contestants of entertainment. But also how it can mask atrocities and secure power. The role of propaganda to grease the gears of authoritarianism is on full display in Sunrise. But so is the role of the revolutionary who must rise against it. The cost, however, will be great. I Love You Like All Fire. Returning to the world of the Hunger Games was a real treat. Full of trauma, but wow, did I enjoy Sunrise on the Reaping. This one is harsh. This hits hard and had me feeling all the feelings, with Big Sad being a primary one of those feelings. A well-crafted tale that earns its telling by making the long list of familiar names not merely fan service but an opportunity to reveal new truths, deepen the history, and expose the lies of the capital to see that it is somehow still even more sinister than we could have realized. This was a fun read and one that was impossible to put down, and if Suzanne Collins writes anything Hunger Games, you best believe it'll be there with bells on point. 4. 5. The snow may fall, but the sun also rises. Who has 2064 likes says, I want to preface this by saying that The Hunger Games are probably my most reread books ever. So much so that I can recite paragraphs of them, and I also might or might have not written a college paper about them. I also seem to be in the minority of people who enjoyed TBOSAS, despite having minor issues with it. So trust me when I say that I went into this with an idea that I would at least somewhat enjoy this book. Oftentimes when series get really popular, the authors make sequels or spin-offs that are not always that necessary. I respected the fact that Suzanne did not follow this pattern. Did not release new books when young adult dystopian fiction was at its peak, so I believed that. The reason why she published the prequels was because she had something important to say. Now I no longer think so, and I think this book either needed more time or should not have been published at all. I will try to be detailed and provide all of my reasoning for such a low rating because I am not hating on this book just for the sake of it. Believe me, if I could choose to like it, I would. It would make my life much easier, right off the bat. The writing in this feels a lot clunkier and heavy-handed than the original trilogy. Also felt like it was dumbed down. Even though the people who are picking this book up are most likely adults who grew up on this series. Regardless, ya does not have to mean that the writing is juvenile, which the previous books proved. I remembered I also noticed the difference in writing between TBOSAS and the original trilogy, and I enjoyed it a bit less because of it, so I was willing to look past it. However, not only did this book feel like you're reading fanfiction of the original trilogy, in addition, there were so many character cameos that it felt forced and silly. I would be happier if we found out this was written by a ghostwriter or something, because I refuse to accept this as canon text written by the same person that wrote my absolute favorite series. What is worse is that characters you have already seen and whose personalities you are already somewhat familiar with did not feel like themselves. Not a single character was behaving in a believable way. Probably my best example is the usually subtle, older Snow that always had interesting interactions with Katniss. I adored their conversations where a lot of things were not explicitly said but were heavily implied. In this book, Haymitch talks to Snow and Snow sounds like a barely legal Reddit-pilled incel and he's almost 60. You're telling me that is the same person whose book we already got and who is such an interesting character in the original trilogy? Okay, incredibly bad character work also applies to the main character as well as the character relationships. Both the Hunger Games and this start with the Day of the Reaping, and both Katniss and Haymitch are immediately given a backstory, and if we are being honest, we do not spend that much time with them in their daily life before they get reaped and taken out of their routine. But while the original trilogy manages to establish incredibly complex and believable family dynamics and relationships in such a short period of time, same cannot be said about Haymitch's story. His love interest, Lenora Dove, is introduced and is supposedly the love of his life. Even if we ignore the inherent dramatic dynamics of teenage love and the fact that the reaping process makes children of the districts grow up quicker, therefore it adds to their end-all-be-all sense of importance of human and romantic relationships. The love between them is barely felt, and for good reason. The first few chapters felt more like the author was trying to put in as many familiar names and characters before the clock ran out, as well as establish the most clumsy connections to the Snow prequel and establish the Katniss-Lucy connection. Kinda felt like I was being hit on the head with a frying pan. So much of the relationship development was told and not shown. Haymitch as a character and his inner monologue contribute exactly nothing to the overall narrative. Not only does he not feel like the Haymitch we know and love, but he also could be replaced with my uncle's ex-wife's family dog and the story would stay the same. Now you could argue with me and say, but Maha, the Haymitch we know is the Haymitch that went through all of that and then some and is a middle-aged alcoholic, and here he is as a 16-year-old teenager. It is not the same. Well, yeah, but he is the same person still, so some of his charm, humor or personality should shine through. But he just feels like nothing but a placeholder for this entire book and what the author wants to do, which I will get into. And what does this book establish exactly? Without any specific spoilers, this book is used to connect the happenings between the first and the second book of the original trilogy. It is just a tool that is used to explain how Haymitch ended up knowing about Plutarch and the entire arena plot. However, it feels like the author had a clear goal in mind and no time or effort for actually getting there. Haymitch is given a task that not only puts him in danger but also could hurt the people who he left behind in the districts. For some reason, and beats me how, he decides to go along with the plot of rebelling against the capital. Not only do we not know why he does it, because we barely know what he thinks about any topic. Or we do, but it is just so, not organically developed. But also he just stupidly decides to trust people he is meeting the first time in his life and whose intentions or hidden agendas he does not know anything about. Compared to Katniss not even trusting Peeta at the start, it is kinda laughably different. The entire book is so conveniently plotted to set up the events of Catching Fire that it actually insults my intelligence as a reader. And dare I say it definitely takes away from the genius and very beloved and kinda now not mysterious in origin plot of Catching Fire. I understand that the author had to show how everything started. But if you have an end goal, you cannot just forget to motivate your character behaviors in a believable way. Another thing that I absolutely did not find believable at all are the actual games. This book is set only 24 years before the events of the first book in the original trilogy. When I read TBOSAS, I was fascinated to read about how much the Hunger Games changed and how they developed throughout history. From something even Capitol residents were not fond of to the absolute propaganda machinery and spectacle we see with the 74th and the 75th Hunger Games. In this book not only are we at the 50th Games, meaning 40 years after the 10th Games we see in TBOSAS, we are also at the second Quarter Quell. Yet everything about the game organization and logistics feels so juvenile and clumsy. Like we are closer to the not well thought out organization the games had at the beginning. The most powerful weapon Capitol has is fear and propaganda. So seeing Capitol being shown as mostly incompetent and messy did not sit well with me so far into the yearly tradition of the Hunger Games. Even the interviews and all of the pregame events feel like genuinely bad TV. Which you cannot say about the 74th and the 75th pregame ceremonies. The point of this book also was to show the power of propaganda and how different Haymitch's lived experience of the games was compared to the actual footage they showed on TV. But that falls completely flat and is very much on the nose pointed out from his POV. Which kind kills the power of the message. Another thing that I understand is the fact why the arena plotline falls very flat. Not only do we already know what will happen at Haymitch's games, but we also have double the amount of tributes, which makes it harder to connect to anyone or care about anyone dying. So it is not an easy job to make the stakes feel high. However, while I cannot fault Suzanne Collins for the fact most tributes and arena events felt so very forgettable, I genuinely felt like the only relationship we were supposed to care about was the relationship between Haymitch and his district ally, Katniss' mother best friend, Maisily. And yet we do not. Because it is so badly underdeveloped. Those two come from two different backgrounds. There is an obvious class difference between the city folk and the people who live at the seam. As we already established, I understand that they are supposed to go from dislike to reluctant allies to friends. But at the end of the book Haymitch refers to her as her sister, which is one of the most ridiculous parts of this. And there are many. There is not one point in which we feel anything realistically changed between them, and we are meant to believe they went through this whole journey of changing their opinion of one another? Okay. Also, there were some parts where Haymitch was purposefully put in situations that parallel Katniss. And those felt really forced and really obviously emotionally manipulative. At the end of the book, the inevitable tragedy befalls on Haymitch. Capitol has its revenge. Yet I felt absolutely nothing. because of already mentioned lack of properly established relationships. The epilogue, which refers to End of Mockingjay, actually made me actively mad because I refused to be emotionally manipulated with a mention of familiar characters I adore with my entire heart after the entirety of this mess. I will be seated for the movie, but the book and I have finished our friendship, and I will happily choose to disregard this as part of the canon. And if the author decides to write about Finnick next, I would gladly not have it at all if it means anything remotely similar to this experience. Anna Mikulik, who has 1020 likes, says, I wish this book would have burned in all fire. That way I wouldn't have had to waste my time reading nonsensical fanfiction that retcons vital parts of the Og trilogy. I genuinely refuse to believe this was written by the same author that wrote The Hunger Games. There's just absolutely no way. I will die on the hill that this book should have followed Haymitch as a victor after his games. Everything about his games was already explained in canon. We could have watched Haymitch in the Capitol meeting other victors that we haven't met before. Seen him mentor kids year after year just to watch them die. Descend into alcoholism. Go deeper into how victors were sold to people in the Capitol. The start of the rebellion, etc. But no, instead we got a boring, bad retelling of his games to tell us things we already know, but with some dumb cameos thrown in for fan service, so people are blinded by nostalgia and not realize how much of a dumpster fire this was. Spoilers from here on out because I have to go into detail to make my point clear. The non-stop cameos from past characters were overdone. Mags or Wirus being Haymitch's mentor would have been fine, but both is just insane. This was another opportunity for Collins to have expanded on the world and introduce us to other victors. Instead, of course, she chooses the easy way out and picks people we already know to dodge having to do any actual work and blind people with nostalgia. Plutarch just happened to be assigned to District 12? Effie just happens to be the one girl's older sister? Oh, and don't even get me started on all the people we just happened to see name dropped while still in District 12. Not to mention that they all just felt like caricatures of themselves. This happened 25 years before the Og trilogy. And yet they all have the exact same personalities and zero character development. Every single connection to the original books and ballads felt extremely forced. It was painful. It was just a lazy way for Suzanne to not have to do any actual world building. Not to mention there were 73 years of the games before the first book, and yet all of these characters just happened to meet in the second Quarter Quell? That's just laughably implausible and again lazy. The plotting and pacing was just horrible. It felt like Suzanne had an end goal in mind but put zero thought into how to actually get there. The plot is just a regurgitated version of the games from Book 1. But beyond predictable, straightforward, and convenient. There is not a single problem that arises that doesn't immediately have an easy, perfect solution out of nowhere. The pacing for the first half was painstakingly slow, while the last half was beyond rushed. It made it impossible to care about anything that was going on in the games or after them because we barely spent any time reflecting on it. This had some of the most underdeveloped characters and character relationships I've read in a book. The beginning in District 12 felt like Suzanne was trying to name drop as many people as possible before the reaping, instead of actually building real dynamics between the characters like she was capable of in Book 1. But I guess she lost that ability when writing this book. I get it, there were 48 kids, so we were never getting to get to know each and every one. It would have been nice to understand a single one better though. Instead we just get a bunch of one-dimensional characters to feel absolutely nothing towards or are just told how to feel about them. I already felt like it was going to be hard to care about anyone's death since we already know what's going to happen. But it was made impossible to care because we knew absolutely nothing about anyone. instead of building new relationships to make this new alliance actually make sense. Suzanne just spends more time making Haymitch talk to characters we already know and have them trust each other immediately for zero sensible reason. The careers still being the dumb jocks who suck up to the capital and have absolutely zero depth or personal motivations is so overdone and boring. This was Suzanne's opportunity to do something interesting with them and make them more complex, but nope, they're just boring characters we're told to hate and not care about their deaths. Even though they're also in the districts and should hate that they're put to the slaughter each year. 2. The development of Haymitch going from hating Macely and not trusting her at all to calling her sister was laughably bad. That was some of the most forced dynamic change I've ever read in my life. Almost forgot how Haymitch's precious Lenore Dove is just Lucy Gray 2.0 for no reason other than being able to throw in a dumb scene between Haymitch and President Snow having that parallel. Oh my god, that just reminded me how horrendous Snow's character was portrayed in this. His interactions and overall dynamic with Katniss were fascinating in the original trilogy, mainly because of how meticulous he is. However, in this book he's just a wide-open book with Haymitch getting all buddy-buddy to thoroughly explain to him, more so the readers, how he also loved a Covey girl. Then basically makes it abundantly obvious he's going to do something to Lenore Dove because of that connection to Lucy Gray. All subtlety gone for no reason. Also, why the fuck was Snow eating the same poison as the parade master? The dude only poisons actual political enemies. He can kill a worker who fucked up whenever and however he wants. He's never had to explain himself before, i.e., giving Seneca the same poison berries Katniss and Peeta were going to eat. If Collins really wanted to write a book focusing on the heavy propaganda from the Capitol, it would have been infinitely more interesting to do it from the perspective of someone from District 1 or 2. They by far have been more affected by the propaganda than any other district, to the point that they view it as an honor to be reaped versus every other district having a higher tendency to rebel, i.e., the propaganda hasn't actually worked there. It would have actually been a new perspective we haven't seen before, as well as added to the overall world building to finally see the ins and outs of a different district. The Newcomers Alliance was insanely juvenile, especially for Suzanne. Again, it's COULDVE been interesting, though somehow with 30-plus teenagers not a single one turns traitor to try to protect themselves? How is that even statistically possible? They all just 100% trust each other and stick to the alliance the entire time because they care about each other so much when they barely even know each other? So boring. They don't even fully consider the fact that helping each other would then mean their own death, because there's only one victor. Every single time Haymitch has to consider what he'd do if it came down to just him and one of his allies. They just happened to be killed by someone else or the game makers. No one had to make a single tough decision. There was always a convenient way to get out of it. It was genuinely infuriating. The OG trilogy was incredible at exploring these hard trolley problems the games forces kids to deal with. But that just goes out the window in this book. There was zero reason for Betty to just automatically tell Haymitch his entire plan. None. It doesn't even make logical sense why Haymitch went along with the idea to go against the Capitol. He kept talking about how much he wants to go back to Lenore Dove and yet at the same time wants to go on a suicide mission. Not to mention the fact that he's essentially the sole provider for his family, but they're treated as an afterthought to him. He goes against the Capitol but then agrees to play their puppet after everything because he finally realized they can do something to his family? I am sorry, but that's just horrendous writing. There was also zero reason for Plutarch to tell Haymitch anything, but of course he does just to get people excited for connections to the OG trilogy. Haymitch doesn't even feel like himself. But this happened so long ago before his trauma and he's only 16, okay? I just refuse to believe that his entire personality came from trauma. He felt like a placeholder that any character could have slid into. Several things in the Og trilogy now make absolutely zero sense because of this book. Catching Fire especially makes no sense. How did Haymitch, Wyrus, Betty, Mags, etc. just act like they've never met before? Haymitch was even hesitant of Katniss teaming up with them and yet fails to mention he literally did in his games? They all kept calling Wyrus insane and yet no one wanted to mention she's only like that because she was tortured for being involved with helping Haymitch? They were all completely fine with just treating her like absolute shit? You're telling me the game makers have dealt with rebellious shit during the games but had no fire way to ensure it never happens again? They really didn't see the plot of Catching Fire happening when it's apparently already happened before? This all-powerful government that's the master of keeping people in control just failed to control people after decades to prepare? Also, I am pretty sure it was mentioned or heavily inferred that Effie is assigned to District 12 because she isn't good enough for anything better. Yet in this book she's considered a hero and Plutarch puts in a good word for her to replace Drusilla and she's ecstatic about it. I am sorry, but again, not only is that horrendous writing, but it also makes no sense and now retcons the original books. The game makers had absolutely no reason to not just immediately kill Haymitch at the start of the games. Instead, it felt like they were almost helping him to win. Snow quite literally tells him to his face that he's going to die a painful death. Did everyone just conveniently forget that? What? Snow just decided to allow him to wreak more havoc during the entirety of the games? For what reason? They have mutts that can go after specific people based off just their scent and they just decided not to have any go after Haymitch? He literally was only attacked by ones that barely did any damage and were easily killed, deterred. The plot armor was insufferably bad. Of course we know he survives, but that doesn't mean he just gets out of everything so easily. What happened to the signature insane Suzanne Collins plot twists? We used to have they're both going to eat the berries. It's a clock. Holy shit, the Capitol brainwashed PETA to kill Katniss. If it wasn't for the baby. What do we get in this book? Absolutely fucking nothing. Not a single jaw-dropping, genuinely shocking twist. The writing was insanely bad. The drop-off in prose from the original books is actually just sad. I can't even count the amount of times I cringed throughout this whole book. There was so much dialogue that didn't even sound like anything real human beings would say. Betty literally meeting Haymitch for the first time. Paraphrased. Hi Haymitch, you're probably wondering why I am here. Well, let me explain exactly why I am here. I am sorry, you're trying to tell me the same author of The Hunger Games wrote that shit? I've seen Dora episodes with more subtlety than that. But apparently Suzanne sees all her readers as moronic 2-year-olds that need every single thing overly explained to them. I was going to go insane if I had to read we're all just animals sent to the Capitol's slaughter or this is my poster one more time. I guess it's my fault for expecting even an ounce of subtlety and nuance from this book. Now let's talk about the themes. I've seen countless people praise this book for its themes and commentary, and I just can't help but be completely dumbfounded. This book explores the exact same themes and commentary that the original 3 do and did 10 billion times better. There is not a single new thought. Wow, the Capitol is extremely controlling and uses propaganda in order to do so. They change things about what's actually shown to viewers. Who would have thought? You could watch any reality TV show and come to the same conclusion. It'd be more beneficial to just read the Og trilogy or 1984. I could genuinely go on forever, but I think this is enough to thoroughly explain why I am giving this 1 star. I also would like to point out I wanted to love this so badly. Everyone I buddy read this with can attest to that. I was constantly trying to convince myself it wasn't this bad and trying to come up with any possible excuse for every issue I had. I just eventually hit a point where I couldn't keep lying to myself. Cherie, who has 688 likes, says 4.5 stars spoiler-free review. They will not use my tears for their entertainment. Now playing. I Know the End by Phoebe Bridgers. This book is undeniably a masterpiece. When I first picked it up, I was fully expecting the games to be intense, thrilling, and completely nerve-wracking because double the tributes? That practically screams chaos. All I cared about were the games themselves. It wasn't until my reread that I realized I was no better than the people in the Capitol. I was so caught up in the spectacle the first time around that I missed the layers underneath, the connections, the symbolism, the way everything ties into the bigger picture of the series. It's truly brilliant. Suzanne Collins only writes when she has something to say. And that's what makes her work hit so hard. Even though this book didn't leave me in tears, it kinda changed my life. And I just know the movie is going to wreck me. And pre-reready just finished rewatching all the films. And to say I am unwell would be an understatement. I know I only read this book a few days ago. But after falling down a TikTok rabbit hole and seeing all the theories and connections I completely missed the first time, I feel like I have to reread it. I have a feeling it's going to wreck me even more the second time around. Update definitely would've enjoyed this book even more if I had reread the original trilogy and TBOSAS beforehand. There were so many connections I completely missed. I'd highly recommend rereading the other books before picking this one up. 3.75 stars mini spoiler-free review. I really can't imagine the sun not rising tomorrow. Can you imagine it rising on a world without a reaping? I honestly didn't think I'd finish this book in a day, especially since I've been stuck in such a weird reading slump lately. But I did. I am still feeling slumpy for some reason. And I am literally about to lose my mind. Anywho, as someone who absolutely loved the original Hunger Games trilogy, both the books and films, and thoroughly enjoyed the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie, I was thrilled to dive back into the world of Panem. It felt so familiar and nostalgic. I really enjoyed Haymitch's story, but I did have a few issues with it. You'd think that doubling the number of tributes would automatically raise the stakes, right? Wrong. The stakes didn't feel as high as I expected. And most, if not all, of the deaths happened so abruptly that they kind of lacked impact. Were they sad? Sure. But that was about it. They weren't gut-wrenching enough emo. I also have to admit, I wasn't the biggest fan of Haymitch in the original trilogy. And unfortunately, this book didn't change that for me. Please, please, please don't come for me. But it honestly felt like the odds were in his favor and he won the games more by luck than strategy. And Snow, how I despise him. It doesn't help how hot Tom Blythe was in TBOSAS though. He's so incredibly evil. And that ending? So unfair. But then again, when has anything about the Hunger Games ever been fair? My heart went out to Haymitch. And I finally understand why he behaved the way he did in the first book. Now we just have to wait another year for the movie. I'll be counting down the days and manifesting Finnick's book in the meantime. End pre-read. I am so excited for this book. It better get me out of this weird slumpy mood I've been in. Or else pre-release. This is not a drill. A new Hunger Games book, Indiana 2025, and movie in 2026. Sign me TF. Mariana Moore, who has 1,822 likes, says, I love you like all fire. 6s of sheer agony and pain and tears and suffering. If someone so much as utters the word gumdrop in my presence, I am punching them in the throat. I will never be the same. I want to crawl into a hole and die a slow, painful death. I actually can't stop crying. How does one just continue living after this? No, you will not be getting any more of a review from me. I simply lost the ability to form thoughts. The nightmare always starts with me feeding her that gumdrop. I roam around the yard like a stray dog, curl up under her window, yearning for her ghost to find me, tough and smart, her hair in 2 braids then, reminding me for all the world of Luella McCoy, my sweetheart of old, like the geese. We really did mate for life. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping. And she is the most precious thing I've ever known.